My name's James Barker. I'm the general manager for UK and Ireland at Mambu, and what I'd like to talk to you today is probably going to build on some of the themes that you would have heard from my colleague Elliot, if you were able to attend that session earlier. I've potentially made the mistake of agreeing to an interactive session, so please be gentle with me a little bit. But just to start off, what I'd like to talk about is how building societies can thrive inside uncertain times. But some of the things that I'll be picking up on are extensions of what you might have already heard from my colleague Elliot Lim this morning, and the underlying theme is going to be delivering customer-centric experiences, but also how we need to bake into our organizations a high degree of agility to deal with uncertainty. And I think uncertainty as an underlying theme is probably quite a relevant one for 2020 in general. Before I do that, I wanted to introduce Mambu, just so that anyone not familiar with us and our expertise knows the perspective from which we look at things. So Mambu is a pure SaaS core banking platform. So for anyone that's used similar technologies, we are to core banking what Salesforce is to CRM. So we're delivered as a single code-based solution. And what Mambu provides is essentially the product factory, the transactional engine, and the ecosystem connections. So ecosystem is a theme along with agility that runs very close to our core beliefs as an organization. What I want to be talking about is why real agility matters. So I think if we touch upon agility, it's probably a pretty relevant theme in 2020, probably in ways that we didn't quite appreciate in January of this year. But there are really multiple types of change that can come up and affect us as organizations, and being prepared to change and roll with the altering landscape is really critical for any organization today. You know, we have types of slow change when, you know, the demographics of the customers that we serve changes and shifts as they mature and as they essentially get older. And we have fast change like we've seen from COVID this year, where, you know, within the period of 4 short weeks, our whole world can be turned upside down, and the requirements of our customers and how we transact and how we do business are fundamentally different, and I would argue also potentially never to revert fully to the way that they were. It's going to drive, you know, a permanent change in some of our buyer behaviors. So, you know, acknowledging that change is the only constant, how do we prepare ourselves as organizations and utilize technology to take advantage of that and give ourselves a competitive advantage? Just to start us off, what I wanted to talk about is that the changing phase. This is essentially the slow change theme that I alluded to, of what our customers look like. And I think the graphic that you got before us is actually talking about the proportion of spend controlled by different demographics. Now, for some time, we've been talking about millennials, but Gen Z is now the age group that follows the millennials, and you can see from I suppose from a consumer spend perspective, they're actually outstripping the millennials as well. So put together, they now account for probably a significant majority of how money is spent. Now, I suppose the disclosure in terms of making this really relevant to building societies is this is customer spend. If we're looking at the profile of building society products, so mortgages, savings, and similar things, this is probably a glimpse into the very near. Customer spend today is probably going to be the people that are getting on the housing ladder and utilizing the kind of products that building societies provide tomorrow. So I think this is important to acknowledge, because these are the people that we now need to accommodate. In terms of how we prepare ourselves from a proposition, I think building societies are fortunate because you operate around some very strong pillars, which are essentially things like, you know, trust and the community. But I think in acknowledging the changing requirements, there's only so far that you want to build your temple, so to speak, on those foundations. I think the strength of the proposition, you know, and a fully digitized thing that's aligned with the expectations of these new market demographics is incredibly important. Things like very frictionless instant experiences, and these are the things that have been, I suppose, inexorably created into our expectations from digital experiences like Uber and Amazon, and even within financial services, people like Revolut now. Beyond that, we've also got the fast change. So within this year, again, the pandemic, in examples like SME lending, it's fundamentally changed how we do business. So the need for small businesses to have access to finance regularly, and even if we take examples that are probably a little bit closer to the heart of building societies, like mortgages, where we've previously relied heavily on being able to get face to face, or and build that relationship. COVID has actually prevented that, so we now need to be prepared to interact and deliver fully digitized experiences. So how do we do this? So I think there are a number of components to achieve genuine agility. So the first of which is agile behavior. So Mambu is a technology provider, but that's really one half or one third of the equation. If you really want to achieve legitimate, genuine agility as an organization, you need to act in an agile way. So it's gearing ourselves up rather than spending 2 years planning. It's about rolling things out, testing and iterating in an agile fashion. In terms of the technologies that you use, you've got to build things in a modular modular manner. We talk about the ecosystem approach, or one of the things that you probably would have heard Elliot talking about is composable banking. And this is about taking lots of small Lego brick style components and putting them together in a way that is unique to your organization. It's essentially a recipe, but by using these best of breed or best for purpose components, you're reducing the overhead of actually having to build that technology yourself. So you're getting a lot of the perks associated with getting something unique that you would if you built the technology from scratch, but you're also leveraging the same speed that you would get from buying a product. So it's essentially a best of both worlds approach. So when we talk about change, I mean, change and how we gear ourselves up from a technology perspective, we're faced with, as organizations, with a number of different approaches that we can take. And I suppose what I wanted to do in this is potentially debunk some myths. So we see typically 4 technology approaches that an organization can take. And it's important to understand the pros and the cons of these different approaches. So the first of which is a fully self-build approach. Now, this is likened to you building every technology with open source, or from the ground up. The result is, if you self-build, you're going to get something that's completely unique, something that fits your requirements without compromise. But the overhead with building and maintaining and versioning and making secure technology is just massive. We've seen a lot of new organizations, and actually this is something that a lot of the traditional banks did in terms of building a lot of their technology, and the overhead in maintaining that is very crippling in some regards. The next approach is essentially the monolithic approach. Now, this is the technology approach of yesteryear, where you would go to a technology provider and they would provide you an end-to-end technology stack that was designed for your particular business. Now, I think this is something that you'll see quite a lot and is quite prevalent within building societies. Now, it's fine from the perspective that if that requirement doesn't change at all, then monolithic doesn't have a great deal of drawbacks. But the problem is that's not the world that we live in. Nothing is static anymore. So when you take a monolith, it's very difficult to change or shift or add new components to it. By its nature, it stands alone. The third is what I semi-playfully call the modulith. Now, This is the larger technology vendors that have probably through acquisition, been able to build a full technology stack. And in doing so, they've tightly integrated it. Now, they'll talk about modularity and the option to, put some of these different components together. The problem with the monolith is that it's designed to be put together. It's not designed to be taken apart. So fundamentally, what you get is the same problem that you would with a monolithic approach. You've got something that isn't very easily adaptable, isn't able to change. And the third and final approach, which is essentially the paradigm that Mambu sits within, is what we call the composable architecture. We call it composable banking to make the terminology a little bit more accessible. And this is about having a set of these best for breed, best of purpose components that can be that are essentially fungible, so they can be swapped out. You can keep a superset of technology components that would enable you to do a wide variety of things, and a subset of components that are specific to a certain proposition or a specific geography. And what this enables you to do is to substitute these components as the requirements of your customers change. So for example, as new legislation might be involved, like open banking, or the ability to onboard people far more quickly, and having sort of document recognition like that you would see, for example, on Fido, you can add these components to your technology stack far more quickly. So you're essentially retaining that high degree of agility. And if we zoom out, I suppose, at a micro level within these technology components, we're a big proponent of SaaS. So when you're consuming these technologies, again, the quality or the attributes of these different types of technology are very important. So if we took Mambu as an example, we're obviously not the only SaaS technology out there, but I think these are common examples. We believe in a configuration approach over customization, which means that you're never having to go through painful upgrade processes. You're not causing or going down a route of essentially forking your software, where it transitions from becoming a product into something far more bespoke. So everything is done through configuration. Because it's delivered as pure SaaS, you just pay one fee, and within that fee, everything is included. So you've got your infrastructure, the application is managed. All you're doing is essentially through a consumption model using this or consuming this service. I suppose the outcome of adopting this approach is that you're able to do things incredibly quickly. Going to market can be achieved in times around 6 to 9 months is what we typically see. It's been done as quickly as 2, but 6 to 9 months in terms of releasing a greenfield proposition is commonly achieved. But beyond that, it's not just about getting to market with something. If you take on board anything that I've said so far, it's the fact that these requirements can and will change, so that when you need to iterate and go to a version 2 or a version 3 or a version 4, you can do that far more quickly. You're not essentially painting yourself into a corner technology-wise. So if we look to visualize what a composable architecture style approach is, because from a business function or capabilities perspective, it's important to understand how these blocks are broken down. So, you can take it by technology stack. So the front end, you've got your contact center, your branch, how your staff perhaps manage loans through case management, and other components and technologies like payments and general ledger. So all of these combine to provide your end-to-end building ecosystem, your architectural ecosystem. From the perspective of different brands, this will give you an idea of what some of these current specialist or best of breed components will provide you. And in doing so, as I said before, you're achieving not just sort of better speed to market initially and in agility, but it also enables you to deliver, and this is what it's all about delivering superior customer experiences. So if you need to implement an improved onboarding solution, you're not ripping out your entire technology stack and starting from scratch. You're able to do so just by adding these smaller components. I suppose finally, through the use of an agile methodology, and it's not purely about the technology, it is also about the expertise that you have. But by adopting this approach and by using technologies that are open by design and cloud native, and building your expertise within your organization, or having a specialist digital partner, you're going to be able to essentially deliver this composable style banking approach. So, thank you very much for indulging me talking about composable banking. I'll turn to the floor for some questions. Okay, so the first question we've got is, what are the barriers for building societies to adopt a composable approach? I think, in fact, one of the biggest barriers is actually within the organization. So when you really want to change the DNA of your organization, it's about having significant buy-in and understanding within the business. So I'd probably call out two key things within that. First, there's got to be a fully committed executive buy-in. The idea that technology is an afterthought today, I think, is fundamentally wrong, and you can't expect the technology teams to deliver that kind of change unless the buy-in for the benefits of that happens at the very, very top of any organization. Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up to fail. The second part of that I would consider the digital expertise. So there's an incredible array of very mature technologies like Mambu and Encino and many of the brands that I just showed you, but you also need to have a very capable pair of hands that can make this a reality, essentially business architects or technical architects. They don't need to be large teams, but you need to consider about how you're going to deliver that, whether you want a long-term services partner that's very digital native, or whether you want to build a small competence center within your business to deliver this change. So I'm just reading the next question. Okay, so I've got another question from Rishi. Societies could be traditionally fairly legacy tech heavy. How do they transition from legacy to SaaS quickly? That's a great question. Thank you, Rishi. I think there have been a number of approaches that have been called out. Let me give a couple of examples of that. One of the things that is one of the constraints is trying to do this in a half measure. So if you have a monolith, trying to get new pieces of technology to work with something that just by design doesn't play nice with other technologies, can end up causing quite a significant overhead. So we need to look at intelligent ways of delivering a fast return on value. So one of the things that we've seen happen to quite good effect is businesses essentially starting to build out their ecosystem approach as a greenfield stack on the side. And it enables them to go to market with a single proposition, and it makes the transition from an old technology stack to a new technology stack far more phased, far more organic, rather than the kind of typical big bang approach that you would see. Now, from a cost perspective, one of the great advantages of SaaS is that a lot of the pricing is very much geared around consumption models. So actually the spend on technology and the spend on services to launch that minimum viable product is far, far less than it used to be. So by getting that first release out, you can test it, you can start to see the return to value, and you can essentially slowly, organically deprecate the older systems. There's obviously a lot more complexity in it, but I think that's one of the approaches that I would support. So I'm just reading the next question. Do you think the sizes of institution could leverage this approach? What about smaller building societies and credit unions? Yes, so again, I suppose talking about talking about the benefits of SaaS, and this is not unique to Mambu. Again, that volumetric approach and the fact that you're not having to spend lots of money and time on setting up environments and infrastructure means that the technology approach is far more suitable to smaller organizations than ever before. Actually, a little bit of history about Mambu, and again, this is a lesson about Mambu, but it's applicable to any SaaS technology. Mambu was actually started back in 2011 to bring banking technology to underdeveloped countries. That was how we first started off, and we knew that the only way that could be done at a cost point that worked was by using a pure SaaS model. So actually, those economies, those savings make it appropriate for any organization. So yeah, it's that the barriers for entry using SaaS are lower than any other type of technology throughout, I suppose, recent history. Victor, cost of adoption is a major worry for building societies. Can you expand on your pricing model? Yeah, I mean, thank you, Victor. I mean, maybe that's one we can pick up offline. But I think that the key tenet here is a volumetric approach. So you're paying, pretty much exclusively for just what you consume. Obviously, there are with SaaS, you're going to get better economies of scale, so you consume more, the unit economics come down. But what you don't have to buy with SaaS is you don't have to buy a tier one size solution and spend that kind of money. The cost is scaled back very much proportionally to the size of organization. Okay. So the next question, you mentioned that typically deployment takes 6 to 9 months, but are there use cases where it's only been 2? What makes the difference? So yeah, that's a good one. So again, I think the key differentiation here when we talk about going live, the 6 to 9 months that I was talking about is typically about standing an entire bank or building society or financial services organization up from scratch. It does draw certain assumptions around the complexity that the ecosystem and the minimum, it's based on a minimum viable approach, minimum viable product approach. Obviously, if you extend the complexity, if you increase the scope, that's potentially going to increase it sort of more to 9 or even to 12 months. But yeah, I mean, in terms of organizations that have done it in 2, the Mambu specific part of that component was actually done by Oak North back in 2015. So yeah, I mean, there are quite a few examples of organizations setting that up in 2 or 3 months. But yeah, I would say the average is around 6. Okay, so the question is, can I phase the introduction of a composable approach into your legacy environment? Yes, you can. The question, though, is you're ultimately going to need a variety of different technology components that perform different functions. So the viability of phasing composable into your environment is whether the functionality of those existing tools or the existing technologies are exposed via API. I think the issue that you can find is if you imagine your technology or your legacy technology stack as probably a big ball of knitting yarn, yeah, it can potentially get to the point where you spend more time unpicking that and trying to make it accessible to other technologies than by starting from scratch. And I think that's something that you need to assess very much on a case-by-case basis. It's impossible for me to give you a one-size-fits-all rule for that. Question from Natalie. Thank you. Do we offer a wealth management solution? Watch this space, Natalie. So the banking engine within Mambu is designed to be particularly flexible, but there are a number of areas where we're trying to develop this to deliver very specialist capabilities within wealth management. So I think there are going to be a number of announcements coming out fairly shortly, but I need to be careful about what I say on this call. So another question, do you think some of the building society's value could be lost if elements are outsourced to third parties? Absolutely not. So the value the value is providing what the customer wants. I mean, if I just take one lesson from for Amazon example, they provide a combination of other people's or other vendors' services and products that they stock themselves. The single unifying thing is about providing the customer with the experience that they want, and that is where the value is ultimately derived. So I think trying to be everything to all people is just not practical these days. So being able to leverage some of these other things is the only way to do it. Now, if you look at some of the more progressive fintechs, maybe people like Revolut and N26, their standard approach is actually bringing in these best of breed components from other technologies. So, you know, and these from, I suppose, from a value perspective, obviously value can be measured in all sorts of ways, but if you take that as company value, these are some of the most valuable technology unicorns in the world, and they are using this approach. We've spoken a lot about putting the customer at the heart of any transformation this morning. Are there any aspects that would bring visible benefits to the end customer? Yes, but I suppose we need to kind of turn this around and see technology in the genuine light that it is. So technology is always going to be an enabler. You know, these best of breed components, I wouldn't suggest to anyone that you just go out and you buy a load of shiny technology without having a clear idea of how you want to use that technology and the value that it's going to provide your customers. So start always with your customers. You know, define the proposition, define the thing that's going to be most valuable to them. I suppose on a side note, when I look at innovation or disruption within financial services technology, I tend to group the innovations in my mind into two different categories. One which is doing something that's been done arguably for a while, but making it frictionless or more invisible. And a perfect example of that would have been, you know, the loan origination or onboarding process, where, you know, before it would take weeks and weeks, and you know, you'd be sending envelopes stuffed full of signed paperwork back and forth, you know, and now you can do it in 2 or 3 minutes using sort of a smartphone and scanning your driving license and so forth. So that's making technology invisible. The second type of innovation is about offering someone value that they didn't have before. So, you know, are you able to potentially use open banking, for example, to make, you know, savings or managing your mortgage, you know, better than it was before? So something quite unique. But yeah, I suppose, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit there. Always start with the customer. I think we've got one more question coming in. No. Okay. Well, I think if we've got no further questions, I'll just thank everyone very much for their time. Thank you.